The small bakery on Maple Street had seen better days. Its pink and white awning was faded from years of summer sun, and the bell above the door chimed with a tired jingle that spoke of countless customers coming and going. Inside, the scent of fresh bread mingled with vanilla and cinnamon, creating an atmosphere that felt like a warm embrace. Behind the glass display case, rows of pastries glistened under soft lighting, croissants dusted with powdered sugar, fruit tarts arranged like jewels, and cakes decorated with swirls of buttercream in every color imaginable. Jennifer Hayes stood at the counter, her weathered hands clasped tightly in front of her. She was 34 but looked older, her auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, dark circles beneath her hazel eyes telling stories of sleepless nights and endless worry. Her jacket was thin for the November cold, and her jeans had been mended at the knee with careful stitches that tried their best to hide the wear. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her gaze fixed on the cakes in the display case with an intensity that bordered on desperation. The young woman behind the counter, barely 20 with bright red lipstick and a name tag that read Amy, glanced up from her phone with barely concealed impatience. "Can I help you?" Jennifer swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Yes, I was wondering." She paused, the words catching like thorns. "Do you have any expired cakes, maybe something from yesterday or something that didn't sell?" Amy's expression shifted from boredom to confusion, then to something that looked uncomfortably like pity. "Expired cakes. It's for my son," Jennifer continued quickly, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "His birthday is today. He's turning 7 and I promised him a cake, but Her voice cracked and she looked down at her worn sneakers. "I lost my job 3 weeks ago. The factory closed down. I've been looking everywhere, but nothing's come through yet, and I just want to give him something special, just this once." The words hung in the air like fragile glass ornaments, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. Amy's face softened, and she opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, a presence made itself known from the corner of the bakery. Marcus Wellington had been sitting at a small table near the window, hidden partially by a decorative column and a potted plant that had seen better days. He wore an expensive charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, though he'd loosened his tie and unbuttoned his collar. At 41 he was still striking, dark hair threaded with distinguished silver at the temples, sharp blue eyes that seemed to see everything, and a jawline that belonged on magazine covers. His leather briefcase sat beside his chair, and a barely touched espresso grew cold in front of him. He had come to this neighborhood bakery on impulse, escaping the suffocating walls of his penthouse office downtown. Board meetings, profit margins, acquisition deals, his life had become an endless cycle of numbers and negotiations. Wellington Industries was worth billions, an empire built on his grandfather's foundation and expanded by his own ruthless business acumen. But lately something had been hollow in his chest, a void that no amount of success could fill. And then he had heard her voice. Marcus had been pretending to read emails on his phone, but every word Jennifer spoke had cut through him like a blade. He found himself frozen, his throat constricting with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. His hand trembled slightly as he set down his phone, and he closed his eyes, transported suddenly to a different time, a different place. 20 years ago, in a small apartment that smelled of mildew and desperation, his own mother had stood in a similar position. He had been 12 years old, hiding behind a door, listening as she begged a neighbor for flour and sugar. "It's Marcus's birthday," she had whispered, her voice breaking. "I just want to make him something, anything." His father had left them 6 months earlier, taking what little savings they had. His mother worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices at night, waiting tables during the day, and taking in laundry on weekends. But it was never enough. Marcus remembered that birthday clearly. The cake his mother had made from borrowed ingredients, lopsided and plain, with 12 candles she'd saved from the previous year. He remembered how she'd cried while singing Happy Birthday, and how he'd pretended not to notice, smiling so wide his cheeks hurt because he didn't want her to feel worse. That night had changed something fundamental in him. He'd made a promise to himself, kneeling beside his narrow bed. He would never be poor again. He would never watch his mother break herself trying to survive. He would become someone who could protect the people he loved, and he had succeeded. Beyond his wildest dreams, he had succeeded, but his mother never got to see it. She died of a heart attack when he was 19, just as he was starting his first business venture. She'd worked herself to death, literally, her heart giving out from years of stress and exhaustion. Marcus had been too late to save her, Too late to give her the life she deserved, too late to repay her for every sacrifice she'd made. The guilt had driven him forward, pushing him to build an empire as if enough success could somehow reach back through time and fix what was broken. But in the quiet moments, usually at 3 a.m. when sleep wouldn't come, he knew the truth. All the money in the world couldn't bring her back or erase the memory of her tears. Now, hearing Jennifer's quiet desperation, seeing the way she held herself together with visible effort, Marcus felt that old wound tear open, fresh and raw. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, drawing both women's attention. He approached the counter slowly, his mind racing. Jennifer looked up at him, her eyes widening slightly at his obvious wealth. The custom suit, the Swiss watch that cost more than most people made in a year, the air of authority that came from commanding boardrooms and making decisions that affected thousands of lives. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice rougher than intended. He cleared his throat. "I couldn't help but overhear." Jennifer's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, and she took a small step back. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disturb anyone. I was just leaving—" "No, please." Marcus held up a hand, and something in his expression made her pause. His eyes were bright, suspiciously bright, and there was a tightness around his mouth that spoke of suppressed emotion. "Your son. It's his birthday today?" Jennifer nodded slowly, uncertain where this was going. "Yes. He's turning 7. His name is Daniel." "Daniel," Marcus repeated softly. The name seemed to settle something in him. He turned to Amy, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. "I'd like to buy a cake for Daniel's birthday. Your best cake, whatever it costs." Amy blinked. "Sir, our custom cakes start at—" "I don't care about the price," Marcus interrupted, but not unkindly. "Show me what you have." Jennifer shook her head quickly. "No, I can't accept that. I wasn't asking for charity. I just thought maybe there was something you couldn't sell anyway." "It's not charity," Marcus said, and his voice cracked slightly. He looked at Jennifer directly, and she saw something vulnerable in his eyes, something that suggested this moment meant as much to him as it did to her. "Please, let me do this. For Daniel. For his birthday." There was a weight to his words, a depth of meaning that Jennifer couldn't quite grasp, but could feel nonetheless. She saw the unshed tears he was fighting to contain, the way his jaw clenched, as if he were physically holding himself together. This wasn't about pity. This was about something else, something personal and painful that she couldn't name. Amy had already moved to the display case, her hands hovering over the selection. "We have a chocolate fudge cake with raspberry filling, or there's a vanilla layer cake with strawberry." "What do 7-year-old boys like?" Marcus asked, looking at Jennifer. Jennifer's voice was barely audible. "He loves dinosaurs and chocolate. He's obsessed with both." A ghost of a smile touched Marcus's lips. "A boy after my own heart." He looked at Amy. "Do you have anything with dinosaurs?" Amy's face lit up. "Actually, yes. We have a chocolate cake that we decorated this morning with a dinosaur theme. The customer cancelled their order an hour ago. It's got a T-Rex and everything. It's one of our best works." "Perfect," Marcus said immediately. "We'll take it." Jennifer felt tears burning behind her eyes, and she pressed her hand to her mouth. "I don't understand. Why would you do this for us? You don't even know us." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Because someone should have done it for my mother." The words settled between them like a confession, and Jennifer felt the weight of them, the years of regret and love and loss that they carried. She didn't know his story, not yet, but she recognized the look in his eyes. She'd seen it in her own mirror often enough, the look of someone carrying more than they should, fighting battles invisible to the world. "Thank you," she whispered, and it encompassed more than just the cake. Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. As Amy went to retrieve the cake from the back, he pulled out his wallet, but his hands were shaking slightly. He thought of his mother, of birthdays past, of all the moments that had led him to this shabby bakery on this ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Sometimes he thought, the universe gave you a chance to rewrite history, even if you could only do it for someone else. But what neither of them knew, what Marcus couldn't possibly have guessed as he handed over his credit card, was that this moment was only the beginning. The simple act of buying a birthday cake was about to set in motion a series of events that would unravel secrets, challenge everything Marcus thought he knew about his own past, and connect two strangers in ways that neither could imagine. Because Jennifer Hayes was not just a struggling mother who had lost her job. And Daniel's birthday was not just any birthday. Hidden in Jennifer's past was a truth that intersected with Marcus's life in ways that would soon become impossible to ignore. A truth that involved a promise made long ago, a debt that remained unpaid, and a connection that had been waiting 20 years to be discovered. As Amy returned with the cake, a magnificent creation decorated with chocolate dinosaurs and "Happy Birthday Daniel" written in bright green frosting, neither Marcus nor Jennifer noticed the old photograph that slipped from Jennifer's worn purse and fluttered to the floor, landing face up beneath the counter where it would remain undiscovered for now. In the photograph, a young woman in her 20s stood beside a man in his early 20s, both smiling at the camera. The woman was clearly Jennifer, though her face was fuller, her eyes brighter, her whole demeanor speaking of hope and possibility. The man beside her, his arm around her shoulders, was eerily familiar. The same sharp jawline, the same intense eyes, though his hair was dark without the silver threads. But it wasn't Marcus Wellington, it was his brother. Marcus insisted on carrying the cake box to Jennifer's car, despite her protests. The November wind had picked up, sending dried leaves skittering across the parking lot, like nervous thoughts trying to escape. Jennifer's vehicle was a 15-year-old Honda Civic, with a dented passenger door and a cracked tail light held together with red tape. She unlocked it quickly, embarrassment coloring her cheeks as Marcus carefully placed the cake box on the back seat. "Thank you again," she said, her voice still thick with emotion. "You have no idea what this means to Daniel. He's been so understanding about everything, never complaining even when I had to tell him we couldn't afford the birthday party he wanted. He just smiled and said, 'Having cake with me would be enough.'" Marcus felt his chest tighten again. "He sounds like a remarkable kid." "He is," Jennifer said softly, and pride illuminated her tired features. "He's everything good in my life. After his father left us when Daniel was 2, I thought I'd never recover, but that little boy saved me. He gave me a reason to keep going." The mention of Daniel's father sent an unexpected chill through Marcus, though he couldn't explain why. He found himself wanting to know more, wanting to understand this woman's story, but he held back. Some boundaries shouldn't be crossed with strangers, no matter how profound the moment felt. "I hope his birthday is wonderful," Marcus said instead, stepping back from the car. Jennifer hesitated, her hand on the driver's door. She looked at him with an intensity that caught him off guard. "Would you—" She paused, seeming to wrestle with herself. "This is going to sound strange, but would you like to come? To the birthday? It's nothing fancy, just cake and some sandwiches at our apartment, but Daniel would love to meet the person who made his cake possible. And I—" She looked down. "I'd like you to see that your kindness mattered." Marcus should have said no. He had a conference call in 2 hours, a dinner meeting with investors at 7, a dozen emails requiring urgent responses. His life was scheduled down to the minute, every moment accounted for and optimized. Spontaneous decisions weren't part of his carefully controlled existence. "I'd be honored," he heard himself say. Jennifer's face broke into a genuine smile, the first real one he'd seen from her, and it transformed her completely. For a moment, Marcus could see the young woman she must have been before life had worn her down, beautiful, vibrant, full of hope. She gave him the address, a building on the east side of town that Marcus knew by reputation. It was one of the older complexes, the kind where plumbing problems were chronic and heating was unreliable. He told her he'd arrive around 5, and she drove away with a wave, the cake box visible through her rear window, like a promise of better things. Marcus stood in the parking lot long after she'd gone, his mind churning. He should go back to the office, he should return to his world of mergers and acquisitions, where emotions were liabilities and sentiment was a weakness to be exploited. But something had shifted in him, some long-dormant part of his soul awakening after years of hibernation. He pulled out his phone and called his assistant. "Patricia, clear my afternoon schedule." There was a pause on the other end, and he could practically hear her shock. In 12 years of working for him, he had never, not once, cancelled appointments without a critical emergency. "Sir, are you feeling all right?" "I'm fine," Marcus said, and realized with surprise that it was true. Something came up. Something important. Back at his penthouse, Marcus found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He opened the locked drawer in his study where he kept his mother's things. There wasn't much. A few photographs, her wedding ring, a recipe card in her handwriting for chocolate chip cookies, and a letter she'd written him when he graduated high school. He unfolded the letter carefully, the paper thin and fragile from age. Her handwriting was slightly uneven, the letters formed by someone who'd had to quit school young to work. But the words were pure love. "My dearest Marcus," it began, "I know life hasn't been easy for us. I know you've seen me struggle, and I'm sorry for that. But I want you to know that you are my greatest achievement, not the jobs I've worked or the bills I've paid, but you. Your kindness, your determination, your beautiful heart. Promise me something. Promise that no matter how successful you become, you'll never forget what it feels like to need help. Never forget that everyone you meet is fighting battles you can't see, and when you can help someone, do it. Not for recognition or reward, but because that's what makes us human." Marcus's vision blurred as he read the familiar words. He'd built his empire, yes, but somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten this. He'd become so focused on success, on proving himself, on making sure he never felt powerless again, that he'd lost sight of the very thing his mother had valued most: simple human kindness. At 4:30, Marcus changed out of his suit and into jeans and a casual sweater. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. When was the last time he'd dressed casually? When was the last time he'd gone somewhere without a business agenda? He stopped at a toy store on the way to Jennifer's apartment, something else he'd never done. The store was overwhelming, aisles upon aisles of colorful boxes and electronic beeps. A teenage employee approached him, clearly amused by his bewildered expression. "Can I help you find something?" "Dinosaurs," Marcus said, "for a 7-year-old boy who loves dinosaurs." 20 minutes later, he left with a set of realistic dinosaur figures, a book about paleontology written for children, and, on impulse, a stuffed T-Rex that was nearly 3 feet tall. It was excessive, he knew, but something about the toy's goofy expression made him smile. Jennifer's apartment building was worse than he'd imagined. The exterior paint was peeling, graffiti marked the walls near the entrance, and the elevator had an out-of-order sign that looked permanent. Marcus climbed 4 flights of stairs, the shopping bag and giant stuffed dinosaur making the journey awkward. He found apartment 4C and knocked, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't been since his first major business presentation decades ago. Jennifer opened the door, and her eyes widened at the sight of the dinosaur. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," Marcus said simply. She stepped aside to let him in, and Marcus entered a world that was simultaneously heartbreaking and beautiful. The apartment was tiny, a living room that doubled as a dining area, a kitchenette visible through a doorway and presumably a bedroom or two beyond. The furniture was mismatched and worn, but everything was immaculately clean. Children's drawings covered one wall, dinosaurs mostly, rendered in crayon with the enthusiastic imperfection of a child's imagination. And then Daniel appeared from the bedroom. Marcus's world tilted on its axis. The boy was small for 7, with a mop of dark hair and eyes that were startlingly familiar, intense blue, observant, intelligent. But it was his smile that stopped Marcus's heart. That smile was a ghost, an echo, a memory made flesh. It was his brother's smile. Thomas Wellington had died 23 years ago in a car accident. Marcus had been 18, Thomas 22. They'd been close despite the age gap. Thomas the dreamer to Marcus's pragmatist, the artist to Marcus's businessman. Thomas had died driving home from an art show where he'd displayed his paintings, his car hydroplaning on a rain-slick road and crashing into a barrier. Marcus had grieved, but life had demanded he move forward. Their mother needed him. The bills needed paying. Thomas's death became another scar, another reason to work harder, to succeed, to make sure their sacrifices meant something. But looking at Daniel now, Marcus felt reality fracturing around him. "Are you the cake man?" Daniel asked, his voice high and excited. Marcus swallowed hard, trying to maintain composure. "I am, and I brought you something else. Happy birthday, Daniel." He handed over the stuffed T-Rex, and Daniel's face lit up with pure joy. The boy hugged the toy fiercely, then looked up at Marcus with those impossible eyes, Thomas's eyes. "This is the best birthday ever," Daniel said solemnly. "Thank you so much." Jennifer was watching Marcus carefully, and he realized his shock must be showing on his face. He forced himself to smile, to act normal, even as questions screamed through his mind. Over sandwiches and cake, Daniel declaring it the most delicious thing he'd ever eaten, Marcus found himself studying the boy obsessively. Every gesture, every expression, every laugh was hauntingly familiar, And Jennifer too, now that he looked closely. There was something about her face, the shape of her eyes, the way she moved her hands when she talked. He'd seen her before. He was certain of it. But where? When? As Daniel played with his new dinosaurs, narrating an elaborate battle scene between the T-Rex and a Triceratops, Marcus helped Jennifer clean up in the tiny kitchen. "Jennifer," he said carefully, "I know this might sound strange, but have we met before today?" She froze, a plate halfway to the sink, and the color drained from her face. When she looked at him, there was fear in her eyes, real, palpable fear. "No," she said too quickly. "I don't think so." She was lying. Marcus knew it with absolute certainty. But why? You seem familiar," he pressed gently. "And Daniel, he reminds me of someone I lost a long time ago." Jennifer set the plate down with trembling hands. "I think you should go," she whispered. "Please, this was a mistake. I shouldn't have invited you here. Jennifer, please." Her voice was urgent now, almost desperate. "You've been so kind, and I'm grateful. But you need to leave. Now." Marcus looked at her, saw the panic in her eyes, and then looked at Daniel, still playing innocently with his toys, unaware of the tension crackling between the adults. And Marcus made a decision that would change everything. "I know who Daniel's father was," he said quietly. "His name was Thomas Wellington. He was my brother." Jennifer's knees buckled, and Marcus caught her before she fell. Tears streamed down her face as years of secrets and silence finally cracked open. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I tried to find you after Thomas died. I tried to tell your family, but everything was so chaotic. And then I learned your mother had passed away, and I didn't know what to do. I was 19 and pregnant and alone, and I was so scared." Marcus held her as she cried, his own eyes burning with tears. His brother had a son. Thomas, the uncle Daniel would never know, lived on in this beautiful, dinosaur-loving 7-year-old boy. "Why didn't you reach out later?" Marcus asked, his voice thick. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jennifer pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I saw you on the news, in magazines, Marcus Wellington, the billionaire, the genius entrepreneur. You were so successful, so far above us, and I was nobody, a factory worker struggling to make rent. What would you want with us? I convinced myself Daniel and I were better off alone, that we didn't need anyone." "But you did need someone," Marcus said gently. "You needed family." The word hung in the air between them. Family. From the living room, Daniel called out, "Mom, can the cake man stay and watch the dinosaur movie with us?" Jennifer and Marcus looked at each other, and something shifted between them. Years of separation, of missed connections, of a nephew growing up without knowing his uncle. All of it suddenly felt both tragic and impossibly fixable. "What do you say?" Jennifer asked softly. "Do you want to stay?" Marcus thought of his empty penthouse, his scheduled life, his carefully controlled existence that suddenly felt hollow and meaningless compared to this cramped apartment filled with love. "Yes," he said. "I'd like that very much." As they returned to the living room, Daniel already queuing up his favorite dinosaur documentary, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Hope. Not the hope for business success or financial security, but something deeper and more profound. The hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to be the family his brother would have wanted him to be. But even as Marcus settled onto the worn couch beside his nephew, even as he began to imagine how he could help Jennifer and Daniel, improve their lives, be the uncle Thomas never got to see him become, there was one truth neither he nor Jennifer knew, a truth that would emerge in the coming days, threatening to destroy this fragile new connection before it could truly begin. Because Thomas Wellington hadn't died in an accident, and someone had been watching Jennifer and Daniel for years, waiting for this moment when the past would finally catch up with the present. The next morning, Marcus woke in his penthouse feeling like a different person. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a space that suddenly felt more like a museum than a home. Pristine, expensive, and utterly devoid of warmth. He'd barely slept, his mind replaying every moment from Daniel's birthday party, every detail of his nephew's face, every word of Jennifer's tearful confession. He had a nephew, Thomas's son, family. The realization kept hitting him in waves, each one bringing a mixture of joy and regret. 7 years. He'd missed 7 years of Daniel's life. First steps, first words, first days of school. All because Jennifer had been too afraid to reach out, and he'd been too consumed with building his empire to look beyond his own world. But that was going to change. Marcus made 3 phone calls before his coffee finished brewing. The first was to his lawyer, instructing him to set up a trust fund for Daniel's education and future. The second was to a real estate agent he'd worked with before, asking her to find suitable housing for a single mother and her son, something safe, clean, in a good school district. The third was to Jennifer herself. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice cautious. "Marcus?" "I want to help," he said without preamble. "You and Daniel. I want to be part of his life, part of both your lives. I know I can't replace the years I missed, but I want to try to make up for them." There was a long silence on the other end. When Jennifer spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "I don't want your money, Marcus. That's not why I told you about Daniel." "I know that," Marcus said gently, "but I want to do this. Not out of obligation, but because Daniel is family, because Thomas would have wanted me to take care of his son, and because—" He paused, surprised by the truth of his next words. "Because I want to. I need to." They talked for an hour. Jennifer admitted she'd been searching for work desperately, applying to dozens of places with no success. The factory closure had hit the entire community hard, and jobs were scarce. She was behind on rent, worried about keeping food on the table, terrified of what would happen if she couldn't find employment soon. Marcus arranged for her to meet with his HR director that afternoon. Wellington Industries had several positions that would suit her skills, and he made it clear, both to Jennifer and to himself, that this was not charity. She would be hired on merit, paid fairly, and expected to work like any other employee. The only difference was that she'd have family looking out for her. By noon, Marcus was in his office when his assistant, Patricia, knocked on the door with an unusual expression on her face, somewhere between concern and confusion. "Sir, there's a man here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he's very insistent. He says it's about your brother." Marcus's blood ran cold. "My brother?" "Thomas Wellington. He said you'd want to hear what he has to say." Marcus stood slowly, his heart pounding. "Send him in." The man who entered was in his late 50s, stocky and weathered, with grey hair and sharp green eyes that assessed everything in the room within seconds. He wore a brown jacket that had seen better days and carried an old leather briefcase that looked like it had travelled the world. "Mr. Wellington," the man said, extending his hand. "My name is Robert Brennan. I was a private investigator, retired now. I've been looking for you for a very long time." Marcus shook his hand mechanically, his mind racing. "What is this about?" Brennan sat down without being invited, setting his briefcase on his lap. 23 years ago, your brother Thomas died in what was ruled an accident. I'm here to tell you it wasn't." The room seemed to tilt. Marcus gripped the edge of his desk. "What are you talking about?" "Your brother was murdered, Mr. Wellington, and I can prove it." For a moment, Marcus couldn't breathe. The words didn't make sense, couldn't make sense. Thomas's death had been investigated. The police report was clear. Wet roads, excessive speed, a tragic accident. "That's impossible," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Brennan opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. 3 months before his death, your brother came to see me. He was scared, Mr. Wellington. He said someone was following him, that he'd discovered something dangerous, something that could destroy powerful people. He wanted me to investigate, to help protect him. Thomas never mentioned any of this to me, Marcus said, but even as he spoke, he remembered those last few months before the accident. Thomas had been distracted, anxious. Marcus had assumed it was stress from his art career, from trying to make ends meet. He'd been so busy with his own life, with trying to keep their mother's head above water financially, that he hadn't pressed. "He didn't want to worry you or your mother," Brennan said. "He made me promise not to tell anyone until he was ready, but then he died, and the case was closed so quickly, ruled an accident so definitively, that I knew something was wrong. I kept investigating on my own, but I was just one man with limited resources. Every lead seemed to dry up, every witness disappeared or refused to talk." Marcus sat down heavily. "Why are you telling me this now, after 23 years? Brennan's expression grew grave. "Because yesterday, for the first time in over 2 decades, someone connected to Thomas's life resurfaced publicly. Jennifer Hayes and her son visited a bakery on Maple Street. You were there. You helped them." The implication hit Marcus like a physical blow. "You've been watching them, watching Jennifer and Daniel?" Protecting them, Brennan corrected. Thomas hired me to watch over Jennifer before he died. She was pregnant, though neither of you knew it yet. He was planning to tell her, planning to do the right thing, but he wanted to make sure she was safe first. After his death, I kept watching, from a distance, making sure no one came after her or the boy. Who? Marcus demanded, his voice rising. Who would come after them? What did Thomas discover? Brennan pulled out several photographs from his folder. They showed Thomas at various locations, outside an office building, talking to a man Marcus didn't recognize, taking pictures of documents. Your brother was an artist, but he took odd jobs to pay the bills. One of those jobs was as a courier for a law firm, Preston, Caldwell and Associates. He delivered documents, picked up packages, nothing sensitive. But one day, he accidentally saw something he wasn't supposed to. Documents detailing a massive fraud scheme involving several prominent business leaders in this city. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, pension funds being looted, investors being scammed. Marcus felt sick. Why didn't he go to the police? He tried, Brennan said quietly, but the police were part of it. At least some of them were. Thomas was scared, didn't know who to trust. He copied what he could and planned to take it to the federal authorities, but someone found out, someone silenced him before he could talk. Do you have proof? Marcus asked. Real proof, not just speculation? Brennan pulled out a small USB drive. Everything Thomas copied is on here. I've kept it safe all these years, waiting for the right moment. Most of the people involved are dead now, their reputations intact, their crimes buried with them. But one is still alive, still powerful, still dangerous. Who? Richard Caldwell, senior partner of the law firm, now a federal judge. He orchestrated the entire scheme, and he's the one who ordered your brother's death. The name meant nothing to Marcus personally, but he recognized it from the news. Judge Richard Caldwell was respected, influential, connected to the highest levels of power. Why now? Marcus asked again. Why bring this to me now? Brennan leaned forward, his expression intense. Because Caldwell saw the same thing I did yesterday. You, Jennifer, and Daniel together. And if I noticed, he noticed. For years, Jennifer stayed under the radar, kept Daniel hidden, never made waves. But now she's connected to Marcus Wellington, billionaire, someone with resources and influence. Caldwell will see that as a threat. He'll know that if you start digging into Thomas's death, if you use your money and power to reopen the investigation, the truth could come out. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. Are they in danger? Jennifer and Daniel? Potentially, yes. Caldwell is old now, in his 70s, but he's still ruthless, and he has people who owe him favors, people who would do anything to protect him. Marcus stood abruptly, already reaching for his phone. I need to get them somewhere safe now. But before he could dial, his office door burst open. Patricia stood there, her face white with panic. Sir, there's been an accident. The police just called. Jennifer Hayes was in a car crash on her way to her interview here. She's been taken to Memorial Hospital. The world seemed to stop. Marcus looked at Brennan, whose expression confirmed his worst fears. It's starting, Brennan said grimly. He knows you're involved now, and he's making his move. Marcus was already moving toward the door. Call my security team, he ordered Patricia. I want protection on Daniel Hayes immediately. Find out where he is right now, school, home, wherever, and get someone there. No one gets near that boy without clearance from me personally. He turned to Brennan. You're coming with me. And you're going to tell me everything. Every detail about how my brother died, every name involved, every piece of evidence you have. Because this ends now. As they rushed to the hospital, Marcus's mind was in overdrive. Jennifer could be hurt, could be dying. Daniel could be in danger. And somewhere out there was a man who had killed once to protect his secrets and clearly had no qualms about doing it again. But Marcus Wellington hadn't built a billion-dollar empire by backing down from fights. He'd lost his brother to this man's greed and violence. He'd lost 23 years with his nephew. He wasn't going to lose anything else. At the hospital, they found Jennifer in the emergency room, conscious but shaken. Her car had been forced off the road by another vehicle that fled the scene. She had a concussion, some bruising, but she would recover. When she saw Marcus, tears spilled down her cheeks. Daniel, she whispered. Someone needs to get Daniel from school. I was supposed to pick him up in an hour. He's safe, Marcus assured her, holding her hand. I have people with him. No one will hurt him. Jennifer's eyes widened with fear. What's happening? That crash wasn't an accident, was it? Marcus looked at Brennan, then back at Jennifer. No, he said honestly. It wasn't. But I need you to trust me. I'm going to protect you and Daniel, and I'm going to make sure the people responsible for this, the people who killed Thomas, finally face justice. Jennifer's grip tightened on his hand. Thomas didn't die in an accident, she said, and it wasn't a question. No, Marcus confirmed gently. He didn't. She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. I always wondered. Something never felt right about it. But I was so young, so scared, and everyone kept telling me it was an accident, that I should move on. We're going to get answers, Marcus promised. For Thomas, for Daniel, for all of us. As Jennifer rested, sedated for the pain, Marcus stepped into the hallway with Brennan. His phone rang, his security chief confirming that Daniel had been picked up safely from school and was being taken to a secure location. What's our next move? Brennan asked. Marcus's expression was hard, determined. We take the fight to Caldwell. We gather every piece of evidence, we build an airtight case, and we bring him down. I don't care how powerful he is or who he's connected to. He killed my brother, and he tried to hurt my family. He'll come after you too, Brennan warned. Let him try, Marcus said coldly. I'm not the scared teenager who couldn't protect his family anymore. I have resources, I have connections, and I have something he doesn't. What's that? The truth. And the willingness to risk everything to expose it. As Marcus looked out the hospital window at the city skyline, his city, the empire he'd built from nothing, he felt a clarity of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't about money or success or building a legacy. This was about family, about justice, about making sure his brother's death meant something, and about ensuring that Daniel would grow up knowing his father had been a hero who tried to do the right thing, even when it cost him everything. The war with Richard Caldwell had begun, and Marcus Wellington had no intention of losing. The next 72 hours were a whirlwind of activity that would have seemed impossible to Marcus just days before. He moved Jennifer and Daniel into one of his secure properties, a comfortable home in a gated community with round-the-clock security. Daniel thought it was an adventure, excited by the bodyguards who were actually trained protection specialists. Jennifer was less enthusiastic, uncomfortable with the sudden upheaval and the obvious danger they were in. But Marcus was relentless. With Brennan's evidence and his own resources, he hired a team of investigators, forensic accountants, and lawyers. What they uncovered was staggering. The fraud scheme Thomas had discovered was even more extensive than Brennan had known. Over $300 million had been stolen from pension funds, small investors, and charitable organizations. Judge Richard Caldwell had been the architect, using his position at the law firm to orchestrate the entire operation. The challenge was proving it. Most of the physical evidence had disappeared decades ago. Witnesses had died or been paid off, and Caldwell had spent 23 years covering his tracks. But Thomas's copied documents, preserved on Brennan's USB drive, were damning. They showed wire transfers, forged signatures, and communications that directly implicated Caldwell. Marcus knew they needed more. Caldwell was a federal judge now, protected by layers of power and privilege. One USB drive from a dead man wouldn't be enough to bring him down. They needed someone on the inside to talk, someone who had participated in the scheme and was willing to testify. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Marcus was working late in his study when his phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but something made him answer. Mr. Wellington? The voice was elderly, shaking slightly. My name is Harold Preston. I believe you've been investigating matters related to my former law firm. Preston. The Preston from Preston, Caldwell and Associates. Marcus's pulse quickened. I'm listening. I'm dying, Mr. Wellington. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. I have perhaps 3 months left, maybe less. Preston coughed, and Marcus could hear the wheeze in his lungs. I've carried guilt for 23 years. I knew what Richard did to that young man, your brother. I knew it was murder, not an accident, and I said nothing because I was a coward, because I was afraid, because I benefited from the scheme. Marcus's hand tightened on the phone. Why are you calling me now? Because I saw the news about the car accident involving Jennifer Hayes. I know Richard's tactics. He'll keep hurting people until there's no one left to threaten him, and I can't die with this on my conscience. I can't face whatever comes next, knowing I could have stopped him and chose not to. Will you testify? Marcus asked bluntly. Yes, Preston said without hesitation. I'll tell you everything. Where the bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking. Who else was involved? How the scheme worked? How your brother was killed, all of it. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Preston said quietly. What I'm about to tell you will hurt. Your brother's death wasn't quick or clean, Mr. Wellington. Richard made sure it looked like an accident, but Thomas suffered. Marcus braced himself. Tell me. Over the next hour, Preston laid out the truth. Thomas had been abducted from his art show by men Caldwell had hired. They drugged him, put him in his car and staged the accident. Thomas had been unconscious but alive when the car hit the barrier. He died from his injuries over the course of several minutes trapped in the wreckage. By the time Preston finished, Marcus was shaking with rage and grief, but he channeled it into focus. I need you to make a formal statement. I have lawyers who can take your deposition, make it legally binding. Come tomorrow, Preston said. I'll be ready. The next day, with Preston's testimony recorded and notarized, Marcus had everything he needed. But he didn't go to the police or the FBI, not yet. Because there was one more thing he had to do. He called Richard Caldwell directly. The judge answered with the smooth confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. Marcus Wellington. To what do I owe the pleasure? I know what you did, Marcus said calmly. I know about the fraud, about the murders, about all of it. And I have proof. Harold Preston gave a full confession before he died. There was a pause. Preston hadn't actually died yet, but Marcus was banking on Caldwell not knowing that. That's quite a story, Caldwell said, his voice betraying nothing. But Preston was senile at the end. Anything he said would be dismissed as the ramblings of a dying man. Perhaps, Marcus agreed. But we also have Thomas's original evidence, documents, wire transfers, communications, and we have witness statements from 3 other people involved in the scheme who are willing to testify in exchange for immunity. It's over, Richard. You can either surrender yourself and cooperate, or I can go public with everything and let you face trial as a criminal. Caldwell's laugh was cold. You think you've won? You think your money and your evidence matter? I have connections you can't imagine, boy. I've buried bigger threats than you. Maybe, Marcus said, but you've never faced someone with nothing left to lose. You took my brother from me. You've spent 23 years living free while he's been in the ground, and you tried to hurt his son, my nephew. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to resign from the bench immediately, citing health reasons. You're going to surrender your law license, and you're going to set up a fund, $300 million, the exact amount you stole, to compensate the victims of your fraud. Caldwell's voice dripped with contempt. And if I refuse, then I release everything to the media tonight. Every document, every testimony, every detail of what you did. Your reputation will be destroyed, your family will be humiliated, and you'll spend whatever time you have left in prison. Or you can do this quietly, maintain some dignity, and spare your family the shame of a public trial. There was a long silence. Marcus could almost hear Caldwell's mind working, calculating odds and options. You're bluffing, Caldwell finally said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Try me. Marcus replied coldly. You have 24 hours to decide. He hung up and immediately called his legal team. Tomorrow morning, we file everything with the FBI. Simultaneous press release to every major media outlet. I want this airtight. But even as he made the call, doubt crept in. What if Caldwell called his bluff? What if his connections really were enough to bury the evidence again? The answer came at 3 a.m. when his phone rang. It was Patricia, her voice urgent. Sir, Judge Caldwell had a heart attack 2 hours ago. He's dead. Marcus sat up in bed, processing. Dead? The hospital said it was massive, instantaneous. He was DOA. Marcus didn't know what to feel. Relief? Disappointment that Caldwell wouldn't face justice publicly? Guilt for being glad a man was dead? There's more, Patricia continued. His lawyer just sent over a document. Apparently Caldwell wrote it before he died. A full confession. He admitted to everything. The fraud, ordering your brother's death, the attack on Jennifer. He even named his co-conspirators. It's like he wanted to clear his conscience at the end. Marcus leaned back against his headboard, stunned. Why would he do that? The letter says he knew his health was failing. He'd had several heart episodes in recent months. I think your call yesterday made him realize he was going to die soon, one way or another. Maybe he wanted some kind of redemption, or maybe, Marcus thought, even monsters could feel fear when facing their own mortality. Regardless, it was over. The confession would allow prosecutors to close cases that had been open for decades, provide some closure to victims' families, and clear Thomas's name. His brother wouldn't be remembered as someone who died in a stupid accident while speeding. He'd be remembered as a hero who tried to expose corruption and paid the ultimate price. The next morning, Marcus drove to the safe house to tell Jennifer the news. He found her in the kitchen making breakfast, while Daniel sat at the table working on a school assignment, one of Marcus's security guards quietly doing a crossword puzzle nearby. When Marcus told her Caldwell was dead and had confessed, Jennifer's knees went weak. She sat down heavily, tears streaming down her face. "It's really over," she whispered. "It's over," Marcus confirmed. Daniel looked up from his homework, confused. "Why is Mom crying?" Marcus knelt down beside his nephew. "Because sometimes grown-ups cry when they're happy, buddy. When something they've been worried about for a long time finally gets better." Daniel considered this, then nodded solemnly. "Like when the T-Rex in my movie finds his family at the end." Marcus smiled, despite the emotion clogging his throat. "Yeah, exactly like that." Over the following weeks, life began to settle into a new normal. Jennifer started her job at Wellington Industries, working in the Community Outreach Department, a position that utilized her natural empathy and desire to help others. She was good at it, thriving in ways she never had at the factory. Marcus helped her find a beautiful apartment in a safe neighborhood near Daniel's new school, not overly luxurious, but comfortable and secure. He paid the first year's rent as a gift, but insisted she pay her own way after that. Jennifer appreciated his respect for her independence. Daniel adjusted quickly to having an uncle. Marcus visited at least twice a week for dinner, teaching Daniel about business, listening to endless facts about dinosaurs, and attending every school event. He set up the trust fund for Daniel's future, but more importantly, he gave the boy something money couldn't buy: family, stability, and the knowledge that he was loved. 6 months after that fateful day in the bakery, Marcus found himself back on Maple Street. He walked into the same bakery, saw Amy behind the counter, and smiled. "The chocolate dinosaur cake guy," she exclaimed. "I remember you. How did the birthday party go?" "Better than I could have imagined," Marcus said honestly. "Actually, I'd like to order another cake. Same design, if possible. Another birthday." "A celebration," Marcus corrected, "of second chances." That evening in Jennifer's apartment, they gathered to celebrate what they were calling Daniel's family birthday, the day Marcus became officially, legally, Daniel's guardian alongside Jennifer. He'd insisted on the formal adoption paperwork, wanting it clear that Daniel was his nephew in every way that mattered. As they cut into the chocolate dinosaur cake, Daniel wearing a paper crown that said "Best Nephew Ever," Marcus looked around at his small, imperfect, beautiful family and felt something he'd been missing for decades. He felt whole. Jennifer caught his eye and mouthed, "Thank you," but Marcus shook his head. She had it backward. He was the one who should be grateful. In trying to help a struggling mother buy an expired cake for her son's birthday, Marcus had found something he didn't even know he'd been searching for. He'd found purpose beyond profit margins, connection beyond business deals, and love beyond measure. His mother's letter had been right all along. The most important thing wasn't the empire he'd built or the money he'd made. It was the simple act of helping someone who needed it, of being present in the moments that mattered, of choosing kindness when it would have been easier to walk away. Thomas would have been proud, Marcus thought, not of the billions or the business success, but of this: Daniel growing up safe and loved, Jennifer finally able to breathe without constant fear, and Marcus himself learning that the best way to honor the past was to fully embrace the present. "Uncle Marcus," Daniel said, chocolate frosting on his nose. "Mum says you're a billionaire, is that true?" Marcus ruffled his nephew's hair. "Yeah, buddy, I am." Daniel considered this seriously. "That's a lot of money." "It is." "But you know what's better than money?" Marcus leaned forward, curious. "What's that?" Daniel grinned, that smile that was so heartbreakingly like Thomas's. "Having someone to share your birthday cake with." Marcus pulled his nephew into a hug, his eyes burning with happy tears. "You're absolutely right, Daniel. That's the most valuable thing in the world." As the evening wore on, filled with laughter and dinosaur documentaries and the comfortable chaos of family life, Marcus thought back to that moment in the bakery. He'd overheard a desperate mother asking for an expired cake, and it had broken something open inside him. all the grief and guilt and loneliness he'd been carrying for decades. But from that breaking had come healing. From that chance encounter had come family. From one small act of kindness had come everything that mattered. The billionaire who had everything had finally found the one thing money couldn't buy: a place to belong, people to love, and the knowledge that his brother's legacy lived on in the bright, beautiful boy who loved dinosaurs and believed that sharing cake was better than any amount of money. Thomas's death had been a tragedy that could never be undone, but his life, his love for Jennifer, his courage in standing up to corruption, his unborn son who never got to meet him, had created ripples that eventually brought Marcus home to himself. And that, Marcus thought as he watched Daniel demonstrate his dinosaur facts for the 100th time, was something worth celebrating. Not just today, but every day for the rest of his life.